Welcome back to this series on building a full stack application with React and FastAPI. In the previous episode, we handled API errors and token expiration, making our app more robust. Today, we'll configure environment variables so our React app can seamlessly switch between local development and production APIs. This setup is critical before deploying the application. Why environment variables matter? Well, hardcoding API URLs directly in your code works for quick demos, but in production, it's fragile and error-prone. We want to use the .env file for development and set environment variables for production. This ensures the same code base can be run in multiple environments without modification. And as you can see, we already have a variable set up in our .env file from our previous episodes called Vite API URL, which is set to our API URL, which is hosted by Vercel, the cloud provider. To complete our React environment variables development versus production setup, in addition to our .env file, we are going to add two more files. First, we'll add a .env.development file, and then we'll add another one called .env.production. So let's go ahead and do that. To do this, let's use terminal, new terminal, and then at our root, we'll create, using the touch command, a new file called .env.development, and then hit enter. Then we'll create another one, touch.env.production. So now we have two new files. In addition to our .env file, we have .env.development and .env.production. Now, if you recall from episode 1, we are using Vite. Vite is a modern front-end build tool used to create web apps, including React apps, that's designed to be a much faster and simpler way than the older tools like CRA, short for Create React App, or tools like Webpack-based setups. So what Vite actually is think of it as two things: a development server for running your app locally, and a build tool for creating your production bundle. Now, Vite uses slightly different system than CRA. Again, CRA is short for Create React App. This was the original tool that was created by Facebook to help developers quickly set up a React application without having to configure everything manually. One important thing to remember here is that variables, if we were to go to .env here, variables must start with Vite underscore. That is a rule for when you're using the Vite system, which we are using that we created our project. Now let's discuss the difference between the files. First, we have the .env, which is the base file. This is the default shared file. It's loaded in all environments. This is the place where you want to store environment variables and their values that don't change. For example, you might want to add of Vite underscore app name and have it equal to the app name. This is where you would do that because it's not going to change. Then the next file is the .env.development. This one is used when running the dev server. For example, when you use the npm run dev command, this is where you would use this one. It overrides the .env file, whatever is in there. If it's defined in that development file, it override it. If there's a conflict in the name, then they would use the one that's in the .env.development. Basically, you want to use this one for local development settings. So if we were to go to this one, let's copy this here, for example. Control copy, and we'll do .development, and then we'll say like, we'll call this V2 or something that's different than what we have here in the .env. It would override, when loaded, it would override, the .env file would be override by this. So instead of my app, you will see my app.v2, where this variable is used in the app. Another example would be to set the Vite API URL to HTTP localhost 5000, which we have in the .env file, which is pointing to our URL located at the Vercel cloud provider. But let's say if we had our API running at this address, this is where it would override whatever that we have here if we run npm run dev command to run the application. Now the .env.production file is used when you're building for production. And that's when you're running the command npm run build command. This will override the .env file, and it used this one for, basically you want to use this one for live deployed app values. And this is actually a good place to place the API URL for our production environment. Let's say this was our production environment backend URL. This is probably the best place to put it in the .env.production file. Right now we have it in .env as well, but let's say if this was different, then this would be overridden by what we have here in the production, in the .env.production file. So in general, Vite uses a concept called mode. Based on the mode, it loads first the .env as the base, then it loads .env.mode, where mode is either development or production, and of course this overrides .env. To use the environment variable in our code, as you already seen, if we go to employee api.ts and we look at our base URL here, we're basically setting it to equal to import.meta.env dot the environment variable that we're storing in one of those environment development files. So Vite API URL is our variable here. To demonstrate environment variables in our app, let's go to the .env file and add, let's erase this and add the Vite dashboard header variable, and we'll set it to equal employee sales dashboard. And then let's remove this out of there, and we'll add it to development. We'll add it to development. We'll also remove this and add this as well. Let's leave it for now. Let's not add this. Let's just leave this where it is right now. So we got the dashboard header variable here, and then we got our app URL in our .env.development file. Let's remove this. And let's go to our dashboard, and then we're going to change our header here, and so we'll set it to the variable instead, .env.vite underscore dashboard header. Now when we run npm run dev command, we expect our dashboard header value to come from our .env file, and we expect our .env development file to contain the API URL value. So let's run this command, npm run dev, and our app is running on local 5173, localhost 5173. So let's go to a browser and see the outcome. So when we go to localhost 5173, we're at the home page. We'll log in using our credential from our backend. admin123. Click login, and we get our dashboard. And this is coming from our .env file. And the URL is actually coming from our backend, which is set up in the .env.development file. Now, if we go back to our code and go to our .env file, and then we'll take the header and then place it in the .env.development. And we want to override what's in the .env. So let's say, we'll just change it a little bit and say v2. Then we'll stop our server, Control-C, and then save our file. And then we'll run the npm command again, npm run dev command. And then we'll go back to the browser and see what we're expecting to see is that the dashboard header at the .env.development is going to override what's in the .env. Okay, so let's go to the browser. So at the browser, we do a quick refresh. As you can see, we're getting the version 2, or the one that's the header that's coming from the .env.development, as it is overriding whatever that was in the .env. So now let's do the same for our .env.production file. Let's add a header here as well, and we'll make it different than the .env file by labeling it a little bit different. We'll say it's production here, -prod. We'll demo this in episode 7, our final episode, where we show you how to deploy this to a cloud provider. So for now, we'll just set this as it is. Now let's just push our code to GitHub. Let's put a message here. Our message will be set up React environment variables for dev and production. We'll commit this, and then we'll sync the changes so that it pushes this to our repo. Environment variables are the bridge between local development and live deployment. They reduce errors, simplify testing, and make our app professional. Without this, deployment setups become messy and error-prone. In the final episode, we'll deploy our React frontend to Vercel and connect it to the live FastAPI backend we've been using all along. Everything we've done so far: API layer, error handling, GWT, environment variables, comes together in production.